Hey everyone, it's Charlene. Today we're going to go over some easy watercolor and stamping backgrounds. And to do that, we're going to be using the My Monthly Hero December kit. It comes with these cute little clothespins as well as 3 ink cubes in Berry Smoothie, Fruit Punch, and Lemon Drop. Has this gorgeous 4x6 clear stamp set. And then it comes with this beautiful large die cut and also these tiny little die cuts that go with the stamps. It has that beautiful big background 6x6 city cling stamp, and also it comes with a few sheets of black cardstock, which I love. So let's get started. For today's card, I'm going to be using that beautiful red rubber cling background stamp. And then I'm also using a piece of distress watercolor cardstock. I've just used some of my dot runner to adhere the piece of watercolor cardstock on the back of my MISTI panel. And then I'm coming in with some anti-static powder that I've rubbed over the piece of cardstock. And now I'm using some Versamark Embossing Ink. So you just want to make sure you get that panel good and covered with the anti-static powder tool when you're working with a really finely detailed stamp like this, because it'll be hard to get out any little pieces of embossing powder that end up on there. So I'm using some fine detail black embossing powder from Ranger, and I'm just going to lightly sprinkle that all over my card panel. So you're going to see this really cool cityscape. Now you could also do this technique if you used ink to stamp the stamp on your piece of watercolor cardstock, but I find that it works better and you get this beautiful shine from the embossing powder when you do it this way. Now there was one little tiny spot that you'll see up there that I didn't quite get the embossing ink on well, but it's not really going to impact the final card, so I didn't want to go in and have to redo the panel. Now I do have this sped up. It does take a little bit longer than what you're seeing here to heat emboss, but when you're working with these really fine panels like this, I find it works to put your card down on a piece of silicone or something like that, some type of heat resistant mat, and then just very slowly work your heat gun over the back of the panel, because you want to make sure that you are hitting all of those spots. So for this watercolor technique, I'm just using some distress inks that I have, and I'm using Candied Apple, Carved Pumpkin, Squeezed Lemonade, Twisted Citron, Salty Ocean, and Wilted Violet. And it is a very simple way to watercolor. This is my favorite way. I have some watercolors, but I very rarely get them out. I almost always reach for my distress inks, and I like them when they're these little cubes, but you can use any kind of dye-based ink to do this technique. So I'm just using a water brush pen. This one is from Ranger. It works really well. I have a couple of other ones, but this is the one I always grab. And you just want to make sure you get a little bit of water going in your pen before you dip it into your ink. And then you're just going to do this swiping back and forth motion so you can make sure to get into all the little nooks and crannies where the embossing powder is at. And you'll see there's a little bit of reflection. So when I turn the panel in just a moment here, you will see that that area up there towards the top right is not actually white. That's just the reflection from my camera light. So in between each color, I use my Lawn Fawn stamp chamois, which I love. At first I wasn't too sure about it, but I've been using it for several months now and I really, really like it. And I just use an acrylic block when I'm doing watercoloring. I find it works really, really well. So if you find that your water is not coming out well from your water brush, you just squeeze it a little bit and make sure to get some water in there. And I don't recommend going with a super strong amount of ink. I think it makes more sense to water it just a little bit down when you start, because you can always add more color. It's a little harder to take it away. And when you're doing this kind of blended sort of wash, sometimes I'll even, like you see there, I just squirted out a few drops of water. Sometimes I'll just go in just with the water in between the two colors and give that a once over so it kind of blends the colors into each other. I love this with rainbow, and I also love this with like some type of ombre where you could do like a dark, a medium, and a light blue. And you'll see here, I'm using every color of the rainbow for this, but you could get away with skipping orange and with skipping green. You'll see each color I'm kind of going past the point of where I want it on the card. It's sort of split into sixths is how I have it in my head. I'm just going a little bit past the point where I'd want it to finish so that the next color can blend into it. So if you're enjoying this video, please do hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps my channel and it helps me to make more content for you guys in the future. So as I was saying, you could skip the orange and you could skip the green. And the reason is that red and yellow make orange and yellow and blue make green. And you're gonna see when I get into the blue and it starts mixing with the green, it kind of creates another little color in between the two. So if you skip the orange, for instance, you would just bring your red down about a third of the way and your yellow up about a third of the way, if that makes sense, but have overlap. So that way in between the two of them, there would be a sixth of the card that was both red and yellow, which would make orange. Hopefully that makes sense. I've done it on other cards in the past. In particular, it's really helpful when you're ink blending, not so much with watercoloring. I find I just like to go ahead and use all the colors because you have a little bit more control, believe it or not, when you're watercoloring than you do when you're ink blending. So as we get down here, you're going to see, like I was talking about, when you mix that blue with the green, it gives kind of this turquoisey color, turquoise color in between the two, which is really pretty. I like that as well. But these bright colors like this really make that embossing powder pop. You can just see it sitting on top of the colors there, and it looks gorgeous. I love, love, love how this watercolor technique looks on these beautiful detailed stamp backgrounds using the red rubber stamp. And you could also use like a silver or a gold embossing powder. That would look awesome. Or you could even use like a white or a clear. If you're going to use a white or a clear, just make sure when everything is all done and your panel is a little dry that you go in with like a microfiber cloth or something like that and wipe off your embossing. So that way any ink that you have left over on there that is sticking on top of the embossing powder is wiped away. Now you don't have to really worry about that when you're working with the black embossing powder. It doesn't really show up, but you could go back lightly over it just to bring back a little bit of the shine of the embossing powder. So once you're all done, just make sure to clean off your brush really well. And what I do is I just kind of drop a few drops of water out onto my chamois and rub it back and forth, and it works perfect for cleaning off my brush. And you'll want to let this dry for just, a couple minutes. It actually dries really fast. I'm surprised by how quickly every time that this watercolor paper dries. Now, I also didn't put a ton of water down on the paper. If you put a lot of water on this paper, you can struggle a little bit. But this watercolor paper is great. It dries well, your panel stays flat. I love it. So now I've just taken a piece of plain white cardstock and I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment from the set, and I'm going to heat emboss this as well. It kind of goes together with that heat embossed background. I thought the two of them went well together and it helped them to sort of tie into each other in the card. So with the heat embossing, again, I'm using the Ranger Fine Detail Powder in black. You just always want to make sure to use an anti-static powder tool. And there's one out on the market that a lot of people really like right now, which is, I believe, by Rabbit Designs or something like that. So if you need one, I would suggest looking at that one. It's like a brush that has the anti-static powder in it. I plan on probably getting one in the future, but for now, I just have the little baggie of the anti-static powder, and that works great. I'm not exactly sure what's in there. I think people say like cornstarch and baby powder or something like that. Some people online in the forums have talked about making their own. That's like, I think they're a couple of dollars, and for me it's just not worthwhile to make my own. I'd rather just buy the little pouch. So there you have it. You can see that it looks gorgeous. And then off camera, I took the large die from the set and I cut out from a black cardstock panel. So I'm just coming in with my art glitter glue, and you can purchase a metal precision tip to go with this glue, which is what I use. And I only use this for these kind of intricate sort of things usually. Generally, I use Gina K Connect glue when I am adhering panels or larger pieces. I am almost out currently, so I am going to use my art glitter glue for everything. But you're going to notice on some of the items when I use the art glitter glue, I kind of smooth it with my finger. And that's just because I have found that it does tend to leave a very faint line underneath the cardstock where you adhered it to the card. If you kind of turn the card in the light, it's not really noticeable, but I'm, kind of a bit of a perfectionist. It just drives me crazy when I can see those little things in my cards. I'm sure nobody else would even notice, but it's just so an FYI. But the precision metal tip on this and how kind of tacky the glue stays is perfect for small die cuts. So yes, it's kind of a pain to have two different glues, but sometimes there's a right glue for the job. So I think having two different glues can serve you well in your projects. So once I have that adhered down on there, I'm actually going to come in with my bone folder, and on the back I'm going to work it on there just to make sure that all of those tiny little pieces, those cute little clotheslines going across with all the little pieces of clothes, that they are adhered well to the panel. And then I'm going to go ahead and I am going to glue the back of this, and I'm going to put it on a top folding US A2 size card, which is 5.5 by 4.25. And see here, you can kind of, I'm going in and smoothing that glue with my finger. When you do that though, you do have to work a little bit quicker because you're, thinning the amount of glue that is going to be on any given part of the back of that card panel. So you want to get it on there pretty quickly so you can make sure it doesn't dry before you get it onto your panel. So once I have that done, again, I'm going to come in with the bone folder on the inside. I just really want to make sure that this is down well because it has all of those little tiny die cut pieces. So off camera, I did cut out my sentiment. I used the smallest square from the Simon Says Stamp Stitched Rectangles. I find that set to be incredibly versatile. I use it all the time to cut out card panels, to cut out little tiny sentiment squares or rectangles, using that smallest die. So I've got that on there, and then I'm just adhering it to a piece of craft EVA foam to give it some dimension. I cut that with the die as well. So the glue works great with the EVA foam, no problems there. And now I'm just going to find a place on my card. And you can see I kind of hesitate and rethink where I'm going to put it, but then I go right back to where my first inclination to put it was. So I just adhere that on there, and that is going to finish up our first card. Isn't that gorgeous? I love it. You could do some really pretty sunset colors or sunrise colors or all kinds of different combinations of colors for that watercolor technique, and it would look amazing. So for the second card, instead of using the dot runner to adhere my panel to the door of my MISTI, I decided to use some purple tape. And actually, I think this works better than the dot runner. It comes off more easily, and then I'm not trying to remove adhesive off the door of my MISTI. So I would recommend using tape rather than dot runner when you're doing this, but it works perfect to ensure that you can stamp multiple times and you're not going to mess up your panel. So I'm coming in with the 3 ink cubes that were included with the kit, and the first one that I'm using, I believe, is the berry smoothie. No, actually it's the fruit punch, and I'm going to do this twice. there was that little spot on my cling stamp where I just am not pushing down hard enough. So I'm trying to figure out right now where that is. And then once I figure it out from looking at the stamp and my panel, I make sure to get some ink back in there really well. And I'm going to apply some good pressure. This is where those pressure tools are really, really helpful. Is when you're working with these kinds of cling stamps, the rubber cling stamps, they work great. So now I'm going to come in with the lemon drop, and I'm just going to make sure that it kind of goes a little bit over where my fruit punch ended, and I'm going to ink up that stamp and go ahead and press down with my panel. And you can see where the two kind of overlap the colors. The inks are going to, they're going to meld together to combine to create a color. So because this is a red and a yellow, I'm going to get this little overlap area of orange. And you could make that as pronounced as you want it. In retrospect, I would suggest if you're making this card, I would say do maybe the yellow, then the fruit punch, then the berry smoothie at the bottom. Just because the berry smoothie and the lemon drop, when they combine together, create more of a brownish orange, which isn't really what I had initially intended, but if that's what you're going for, and it does still look really nice. I think it just might look a little bit better with a different color combination or different arrangement of the colors. And you can also do this with distress inks. You could do it with any kind of colored ink pad, and it's going to look awesome. So now I'm coming in with my sentiment just on a piece of plain white cardstock, and I'm going to double stamp it. I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. This is my kind of go-to black ink that I use. And then I'm using the largest of the stitched rectangle dies in order to cut out my panel that's going to go on my card. So I'm just using some of that purple tape to adhere my die cut or my die, just because I want to make sure it doesn't move around on me when it's going through. And then I'm going to use a stitched circle die from a similar set from Simon Says Stamp in order to cut out my sentiment. Off camera, I did cut out a piece of black cardstock, and I cut it just a little bit larger than my panel because I want to have this very thin black frame outline behind this panel. And then I'm going to put it on a white US A2 sized card base. So you're going to have your panel that's all colored with these beautiful colors, and then a thin black outline, and then it's going to go on top of the card base. So you're going to have a nice little white outline on top of that. And so you can see here, I'm just using my dot runner to adhere that on. I actually prefer using my dot runner to adhere panels if I have it handy, but I'll use the glue if that's what I currently have. I keep a couple of different kinds of adhesives around because I think they're just good, as I mentioned, for different things. They all are. So it's just a tool. Different tools are good for different things. So again, I cut out a piece of craft EVA foam. I like to use that a lot when I am popping things up, rather than the adhesive foam squares. I do have those as well in my stash, but I only really use those if I'm trying to pop up small little spaces, or if I'm trying to go over things that might require only kind of areas with the foam so that it doesn't interfere with other parts of the card, if that makes sense. So going to adhere my little sentiment on there, and then off camera I did come in with some black enamel accents from Ranger, and they come in a little bottle, a little squeeze bottle, and you can just make those dots as big or as small as you would like, and you just need to make sure to let them thoroughly dry. Don't be tempted to stick your finger in them to check. Just give it a couple hours so that they can thoroughly dry. So those are our two cards, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this. Again, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And I will be back again soon with another video. Have a great day. Bye.